I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so as a part of last session, mainly we were focusing on the way how the service can be made secure using one of the authentication mechanism called basic authentication. That's something we just understood. On top of it, what we also got is that when we have a separate database that we would have created, and if you want to plug and consume that into our CAP service, how we can do that. Okay, so let's just go with the first one. So as a part of the yesterday's session, when we say we introduce a basic authentication, definitely certain things comes into picture when you go with the authentication. A passport is one of the Node.js package, which is ideally responsible for the token generation, which will be used ideally if you would like to generate the authorization token. On top of it, the another important package that we'll need is a @SAP access security. Now, once we have added these two, if you would like to decide which kind of authentication we would like to go for, in most of the production cases, you will see we are going with a XSUA based authentication. That's something we are going to learn in the session follows. For now, in order for us to have the service up and running, to the bare minimum requirement, we'll need a service to be secured, right? So that's the reason we went ahead with the basic authentication. So in the CDS requires, in the authentication kind, you have to specify basic, then you will specify a users. So here you can specify set of users. So for example, I just specified one user called admin. You can have a different set of user you could have specified. I specify admin user. This is the one which I'm using for my applications usage. So if I try to open any of my service, I'll be able to log in with the user ID and password I would have specified. But this should not be the way how we use it in the best practices, or I can say in the production environment. So this is something we should always take care of. So the XSUA authentication which we are going to follow, you will learn the detailed information, I guess, in that particular session. Other than that, when it comes to consumption of an existing database, right, there are a couple of steps. So we understood that we had a database that was available in the form of a HANA Cloud DB. That's something we created. Now we would like to use that, right? So that database is also going to be a resource. So if we are going to define a resource for the existing database container, we'll always go ahead with the type called org Cloud Foundry existing service. Here we'll provide the service name, and here what we'll provide is the service name, and we'll provide the into the variable. Now, while we have multiple database resource, right? There is a HDI container. This in a way is also one of the HANA database container, right? So there is also HDI instance of a container. If we say that for my database to work, it will need my HDI container to be available, we should be specifying which container is the main container and which containers are the one which we are consuming. Because at any point in time, a CAP can only have one main container, rest all will be service replacements. So what we did is, in this particular BTP deployer, we specified that we'll need this, plus we added an additional property called target container is nothing but this one. So any point in time, my CAP application is doing any sort of communication, it will always do it with the help of this particular container name, which is going to point it to the actual database container. So this the line which is quite important if you do have more than one database containers consumed in your application. So there is one which is the native to it and the one which we are consuming. In total, it makes two. So we'll need this line for sure. Okay. Another thing is the other which we are consuming. So we have to specify the resource name of it. We have to specify group with service replacements. Then we are going to specify some sort of a unique key parameter. Okay. Now this unique key is something which will be used in order for us to decide the role assignment for the component that we are going to use. Okay. And this service is nothing but the service name over here. Now, if I just go in the DB in the SRC, what you will see is that we created a synonyms folder. Here we created some synonyms file, right? So in this particular synonyms file, we mentioned that the remote object with this name available under this schema, this is something that we are willing to use, and we'll name it into our repository as this one. So if any other project is using this particular component, they might rename it as whatever they want. Okay, so a single remote component can have different names in a different CAP project they are being consumed. Okay, so this is the one that we consumed it as. Now, in order for us to use that, we have to decide the roles. So as my remote fold container had multiple roles for write and read activity, we choose saying we'll are planning to have some sort of a transactional activity in this application. So we choose a write role assignment. Now, roles to be rightly assigned, we should be specifying the identity of the granting service, which is nothing but a remote service. So in this particular case, as the employee DB was the key that we specified, we'll use the same key over here called employee DB. We'll specify two kind of role, object owner and application user. In object owner, we'll always specify the role which are having privilege with grant option. So if my table is being consumed in a view is being used in any sort of other further procedures that can also execute any operation they want on top of it. Okay. An application user will ideally be nothing but your end user who is going to trigger some calls, and internally your table or view or anything which is there will be queried. Okay, so this the bare minimum thing that we did. Post which we tried doing the build and deploy, but what thing we may be stuck up with is that as we are with the trial account, our number of time we deployed the particular service, and maybe in the trial account the number of time we perform deployment are quite limited. That's the reason we stuck. So maybe we built the project already, but when we tried deploying, we started facing some error saying your trial limit, users limit has already exceeded, right? So how we can get rid of this? So the limitation they have done is that via the short command, which uh, BS has already provided, you cannot use them, let's just say in an unlimited time like we have in a standard account, right? This is just a free tier account. So for that you have to go with a normal command line interface. So for example, I can simply say that when I used to deploy this, ideally it used to trigger some command internally. What was that? It was saying I would like to deploy something on Cloud Foundry, so I'll simply say cf deploy. And rather than doing a right click and deploy over here, which internally is also going to trigger the same command, you can go via the command line. Right. So I'll simply say cf deploy. And here you will simply say, where is I am placed? I am currently in BTP BEMP, right? Which is a folder called MTA archive. So I'll just simply say MTA. I'll just say archive. Right. I just press tab. So it point me to the folder. Post which I have to give the name of the file. So for example, if I just give a tab, it will point me to the file because it just have got only one file. Now I can press enter. Okay. And I have to re-authenticate because my Cloud Foundry, okay, login has not been done. Let's wait. Okay, now it has just failed. So I'll just simply say CF login. Okay, now I am done. Now I'll again say CF deploy. I'll just point to the right file, which is nothing but archive file for me. And I'll just simply add that file name. I'll press enter. Now, as you can see, the system has started with the deployment. Now, this deployment ideally should deploy my file if everything looks good. In case there is something which may not be in the right shape, we might get error. So let's see, I guess, in case we get some error, we'll try to resolve that. And as a result of this, what we are expecting is that the remote view that we consume should become part of my data model. And as a result, what we have also done is, right, we have also done something. We have considered employee service DB model over here. And here we have done CDS persistent exist because the view, or I can say synonym, that we are trying to connect to already exists. So we don't want it to be recreated, rather we are consuming that. That's the reason we said CDS persistent exist, and we have created it. So it won't create a table, rather it will create a so-called synonym. Okay, that's the main idea. Let's wait. Okay, so my DB deployer is being deployed. Okay, it seems it failed. Your service was running, but your something failed. Deploy on your DB deployer. That's being retried, right? So let's see what's wrong with your DB deployer. I'll go over here and I'll open the logs. As we can see, it fails. What does it say in the error file over here? It says the service name. Okay, the service name as replacement for service employee DB not found. The service definition does not exist. Okay, why is it saying that? Okay, if I just go over here in the empty YML, what we see is that, okay, the service name we are using over here, which is pointing to this one, which is this one. Okay, so what we missed is here we are using dollar to get the service name from the variable. The same variable we are using, but in order for us to use that, we are using a tilde sign. But here, by mistake, we just use the name by default. We should also use a tilde sign because there is a variable, right? There is not a fixed constant like a employee DB. So that's the reason system was not able to identify it. So let's just do this. Uh, I'll just simply add a inverted comma and a tilde and a curly bracket, and I'll just go to the end of it and the curly bracket. Okay, so now if we can see, as we are consuming the variable, it should be within the tilde sign. Otherwise, system will try to consider this as a name and which will fail, right? So I just use that, and now I see that, okay, this should be fine. Now, in order for me to work with this, let's just do this. If we would like to increase the version for a new archive file, we can also do that. And I'll try to build this. Okay, and maybe I guess this one, the one which we don't need, we'll try to clean that up maybe, I guess, once the bill is done. Seems CF service is a bit slow today. Otherwise, this bill would have already been done. It's taking some time in order for the bill also to get completed. Okay, it just generated the file. It should do the final cleanup and maybe we should be good to deploy. Okay, I'll just delete the old archive file to save the space. Okay, so I think the build is done. I'll try to deploy this, and as usual, I'll try to deploy it using the command. Okay, and I'll try to deploy this again. The moment you have done the deployment, in case there are some operations in background going on, you can just simply say yes only, then it will try to proceed with the new deployment. You can just simply say yes. Okay, I hope the DB is up and running, otherwise it will again fail. Yeah, DB is running. Okay, so it's the kind of final moment. It's time to deploy the DB deployer. Hopefully everything should fall in part. Okay. Okay, so your service is up and running. DB deployment also did not give any error. So mostly everything should be fine. Maybe once it says process finished, yeah, now it does. We'll try to open the database explorer. So I'll just go in database explorer now. Okay. Okay, now what do we see? So here we'll expand this one. In the tables, as we can see, we have just employee and department, the one which we had earlier, right? DB, employee DB. But this one also, the one which we placed under my data model did not created a table over here, right? That's not there. If I try viewing in a view, as you can see, I can see a view only for the service endpoint. Only for the service endpoint, employee service underscore central employee, correct? I still do not see, the endpoint for my, let's just say entity that we created. Now, if I just go over here, if we view into some so-called synonyms, as you can see, it's pointing me to EMP APP central employee, the one which we created over here, right? In the SRV synonym, we created a central employee as a synonym, and here we are able to see that. Now, if you just go over here, if you open that, as you can see, it's trying to point to this particular component. If you open the data, there is the one which will open. Okay, so at any point in time, if you insert the data into this, the one in the central DB should start reflecting, right? So maybe I guess we have done enough practice to insert the data via endpoint. Now let's just say this is a HANA database explorer and we would like to play around something from here, right? What you can do in that particular case. So we are now going to perform some operations on my HANA database explorer itself by some SQL console. Before that, anyone having any doubt on the deployment part or the connection part, how the things are connected to each other and anything? Okay, perfect. So it seems we all are good. I'll go back and maybe I'll try to, okay, look. So here, when I say I have got multiple database artifact, for example, I'm currently working on synonym, right? I'll simply right click on this and I can simply say, hey, I would like to, let's just say, add a select data. I would like to generate some create statement using with some creation can also be done. I can do anything, right? So for example, if I just say generate a create statement, as you can see, it's generating a command to create a synonym. Okay. If I just go over here and if I simply say generate a select statement, it will also help me generating a select statement. So there is nothing but a SQL console from where you can play around saying, okay, what all things you would like to do. On the right hand side on to the top, you would see that, okay, which database container it is connected to. So it says it's connected to this one. Same way, if you would have opened the one for this particular, for example, this particular table, and if I try to open this, it also gives me give me an option generate create statement, select statement, insert statement. So for example, if I say generate insert statement over here, it generates an insert statement by specifying insert into this one, and it's now connected to HDI BTP. So I have two console connected to different database container, which is quite possible, right? So for example, I am trying to add something over here. Okay, now let's just say I would like to add some dummy data over here. I'll need some GUID, so I can say generate some GUID online. Let me just pick this. I'll generate some GUID and I'll copy this and I'll paste it over here. I'll just say some dummy name and I'll just add some mail ID. Okay, I'll add some department and maybe some timestamp created at, maybe let's just call it as a current timestamp, which is nothing but again a HANA SQL inbuilt command. Those of you who would have worked on AMDP, right? I guess these are the same thing. It's a SQL script, nothing but an SQL script. I'll just say session context, like we have a Psi unit. Same way here we have something called application user. So I'll just simply pass the same thing over here. I'll copy this and I'll pass it in the modifier. Now we have prepared a set of data. Now we are trying to insert it where we are connected to BTP DB employee. So if I try to insert it over here, as you can see, it says one record inserted. Okay, now as it does that, I'll open this and I'll try to open this one, which is nothing but the database table within this container. I can see the record over here. Now what I can do is I can go into the synonym over here. So I have already written a select query on my synonym. So if I try executing this, as you can see, I now see the record over here as well. Correct. So it's not that the data is available only over here, but whatever operation you perform here, the same will also be updated. Right. So for example, maybe I would like to perform some operation saying update maybe this one, and I'll just try to set maybe let's just say department is equal to SAP BTP. Okay. And I'll just simply say where my ID is equal to, I'll copy this ID from here. Okay, and I would like to update this. So what I'll do is, as I have multiple SQL command, I'll just try to select the one which I need. Okay, and I'll just execute this. As you can see, it says that this record got updated. Now let me just try to view this again. I'll again execute a select query. And as you can see, it updated the thing which I did, right? So idea is that it's not only the main central container, right? I updated it via the container which is consuming that. It got updated. Now, if I just actually view the real container, which is the one which is carrying that particular table, if I just open this, I can also see that this particular data is now available over here into the SAP BTP, and I can easily view this. Okay, or I can whatever different party are there who are performing any sort of operation, I can easily uh, ensure that those data are now being done, being updated centrally rather than individual service taking care of it. Okay, so if for example, I updated it over here, now I have another application and I am trying to query the data and display it in the form of a service. So when I say displaying in the form of a service, definitely I'll have a view, which is nothing but this kind of employee service view. So if I just simply open the data from here, I'll be able to view the updated data. Okay. So if it's also being updated from one source, other source will also see the same set of a data. So my data is now centralized. That's the main idea. Okay. So this is how a centralized database work. It's part of one being consumed into another. Whichever party updates it, other party will also start seeing the same. So it's a data concurrency which will be maintained rather than individual application having their own set of a table, which at the end of the day will result in a dual or multiple maintenance. That's something we won't be doing. So as a best practice, whenever you are trying to create an application which has a database, which is generating a data which might be relevant for different application to work. As a best practice, you should create a separate database project. Try to dump all such a reusable database into that particular specific one, and then ensure that particular DB will be let's just say that particular database will be connected to all the CAP services. Okay, so that's how we should be designing it. I hope it makes sense. Okay, now let's just say as we have done this, let's just try to also understand few more things. So for example, I have this one, right? I have got couple of thing tables. Maybe I have got department over here, which contains some department. Here is the one which contains some employee. Uh, okay, now let's just say, okay, maybe I guess here the key parameters are a bit different, 30, 36. Okay, if we want, we can also change this thing. Okay. Okay, let's just do this. So what we are trying to also understand is that this what we have worked till now, or I can say what we have understood from a DB perspective till now is let's just say a data model which can create a table. The one which exists in the form of a synonym, we can connect to that. What if I'll need a view? Okay, so for example, I'll just go over here and I'll simply say that I have an employee information over here, which was containing all this stuff. Okay. And maybe I would like to get the idea of some employee. Maybe I just need some information saying what is the name of employee, email ID, and all the things. I don't need this particular timestamp and all, right? So what I can simply do is I can simply open a SQL console of it. I'll just simply say generate SQL console and I can play around, right? I can simply say, hey, I don't want all this. I just simply want this one, saying that I am currently part of this particular container. Okay. And within this container, I have got this particular table, employee EMP table. Okay. And I would like to select this information, which is nothing but my ID, name, employee ID. So even though it contains thousands of columns, I just need this one. That's all I need. Okay. So if I am trying to perform any such operations, which can give me some specific data, which can give me some specific data which may not be originally available as a part of a table. Rather, I'm creating a specific view to show it to my end user. So currently, I have just created a simple select query using which I can, let's just say, get the data over here. Out of 10 columns, I'm getting it only from 5. Tomorrow, I might also create something complex saying there can be a master table, for example, department. Rather than storing this information directly, I might be storing some ID. I would like to create some join between them. I would like to create some sort of a condition so that my data can be interpreted in a different way. Okay, that's something we would like to do. So what we can do is we can simply create a view. Now, what a view will ideally need? A view will ideally need nothing but a, I'll just simply try to make this select very quite simple rather than this double inverted comma, which were quite optional, so that it's more readable and you guys are quite clear with that. I'll execute this. So for example, I am just getting this information which says that, okay, I have particular select query, which can only give me the 4 set of information which I am looking for. Okay. Now, in that particular case, if I would like to expose this select query as an entity, okay, how can I do that? So what you can simply choose is that, okay, I'll have this select query. I can have a very long, a complex select query as well. Whatever I need, I can create or convert it into a select query, which internally is going to get converted into a view which I need, right? So the one which you would have seen that the moment we said I am trying to deploy something or I am trying to build something, it would have created some generated component. Now this generated component onto the DB would be nothing but some set of views, right? The HDB views and everything, right? Same way I can create my own set of views and that view I can also expose, right? So what, for example, I would like to do is in this particular DB generated component, we won't touch anytime. It will be just generated. We'll just view them for our knowledge, but we won't change them anyway. If I'm trying to create something, I'll create it within the DB SRC, and here I'll create a folder, for example, for views. You can very well write that open as well. Okay, you are not supposed to create a folder. I am creating a folder, so logically, it's easy for me to maintain the things. That's the only idea. Now I am trying to create a view. So for example, I'll just simply say v underscore employee um let's just say v underscore employees. Or I can say employee view. Okay, and I'll just simply say HDB view. That's all. Okay, and I'll just simply say view. Maybe let's just call it as a v underscore employee view. I'll just simply say as, and after writing as, whatever select query that you would have prepared, right? So currently it's a simple select query. Tomorrow, let's just there can be a lengthy complex select query that you would have prepared. You would have verified, okay, it's giving me the expected output. Post which, once you have the select query ready, just copy and paste it over here. That's all you are supposed to do. All you are doing is you are giving it a name, saying, I want this view. How the data is going to come? You are saying the data will come by the tested select query, which I have already prepared from my SQL console. Okay. And once you have that particular select query, if you try to build this, what it will give you is a particular view with this particular name generated on your database. Okay. Now, next thing we should be planning is, for example, I created a view with this name, a funky name, V employee view, right? Can I expose this in a form saying this particular employee DB model can also have it, plus my service can also have it? Is it possible? If I would like to have it over here in the employee DB model, anyone, any inputs on this? So we did the same thing for synonym, right? Synonym also created some database artifact and we were able to expose that. When we were exposing it, what precaution we took was we created a EMP APP central. So this is the initial that we added, but this view does not have it. So is there any way I can expose this particular one in the data model, and at end of the day, I want it as a service endpoint over here? Is it possible? I hope you guys are with me.
Yes, Sumit.
Okay, so I hope you guys got my question right. Maybe I guess there is not a let's just say some unique scenario, but there is a common scenario which will come up when you are working on any CAP application, because many a time you would be dealing in a situation when you are trying to expose the thing which are quite readily available in the form of a table, which may be quite straightforward thing. Many a time you might end up preparing a different combination of a data and exposing it because it may be a requirement. For example, you are trying to generate some dashboards, some sort of a statistics it wants, some sort of a quantity calculation and XYZ thing. It just needs a view, right? Nothing more than that. But in order for us to expose that, we should be knowing what we can do and what are the steps we should be performing for that. Okay, so there are a couple of ways we can do it. Okay, so for example, I'll just say V employee view. If I would like to expose that, the simplest way can be that I won't overrule the things which are going on. Rather, I'll just simply say employee underscore app underscore employee view. Okay, that's something I can do, and I can just simply create an entity with this name. That's one way, correct? Because whenever my data model built, it tried to look for some component with this namespace emp app plus the name of your entity. And whenever you are saying that persistent exists, because the database component exists, that's the one which we are trying to create. But if it doesn't find that, it will give you an error. Okay. Now, if you would like to go with this one, for example, we are trying to expose all the views like this. What you can also choose is that I would like to create some sort of a more data model. Who said that, okay, I can have only one data model, right? For example, I can say I'll create a new file. I'll just say views model, and model is also not a mandatory keyword. I am just writing that so you know that we are doing some sort of a entity modeling over here. .cds. I can do that, right? And I can simply say all the views I would try to expose in the form of a name called V. Okay. And here I'll simply say I would like to create an entity whose name is nothing but this employee view. Okay. And maybe let's just say I'll try to get some sort of a CUID over here. Maybe I'll just try to add it over here, saying I'll just need a CUID. And then I can choose that, okay, I have a view which expose this three column. Let me just have that as well. So I'll just expose this three column. The data type of it should be in a way that at least your data should not get truncated, right? So for example, the view which I created, the data source of it is emp app employee. It means it contains the data of 255 characters at the max. So I can freely choose it as a 500 character, but I should not write it as a 254 or anything less than that, because at any point in time it come across a data which is exceeding it. it will fail. You might start getting some error on the execution, right? So this is a normal terminology of any SQL theory or any SQL database you would have worked so far. So now it says v underscore employee view. This is what it will try look for. And in order for the system to try looking for it, I have to add something called CDS persistence exist. Correct? So I'm just saying that this exists. Now I would like to expose this as a let's just say some sort of endpoint. So I can simply go over here and I can simply say that, hey, I would like to use few more things. Uh, for example, V from my data model, view model. I can simply do that, right? And now I'll simply say I would like to create some endpoint for that. For example, my employee view as select from my, for example, v dot employee view. And as it's a view, I am just willing to perform some sort of a read only operation. I can very well write something called @read only, which will make it read only. It won't allow anyone performing any sort of create, update, delete call on this endpoint. The moment someone does that, it will fail. So this what we can do if we are willing to create different categories of data in coming from a different namespaces, right? So you can simply define n number of data model. No one says that you can only have one data model. Many a time it makes sense for us to break down the things so they are made more manageable, right? Because namespace are nothing, namespace are not there just to identify your application. It may also identify different areas of your application, right? So you can have n number of namespaces. You can have n number of sources out of which your services might be getting the data. Getting my point? Okay, so this is what we can do. This is what we can consider is exposing a view also as a endpoint. We considered that if I'm creating an entity, it will create a table. If I have a synonym, which is having its underlying database artifact somewhere, we can also make it part of this family. We can expose this from here as well. On top of it, if there are something which we created, which we invented with help of some SQL, by means of some sort of a HDB view or some sort of a views, we can also expose that freely. There are no restrictions on top of it. But while we are doing that, we should again specify CDS persistent exists because the underlying database component actually exists. We don't want anyone to create a table for that. That's the main idea. Okay. So I can clear this and maybe I can very well build this. It will get deployed and the things will start working the way it's working for the other thing. But as we know how the deployment works, I won't do it. Maybe you guys can try it out, deploy it, and maybe where you can expect this to start appearing. So like we have a synonym which just started appearing over here because it was a synonym. Same way, if we create a view like this, it will start appearing under a view section over here. Okay, you will see v underscore employee view and you won't find it in the table because you already mentioned that it exists. But on top of that particular view, you will also find one more view called employee service underscore employee view. Okay, because that is an endpoint view. That's something you can always expect. Okay, so there is one more flavor of how a database can be tweaked to make it more modularized, make it more readable, and how based on the purpose of it, we can let's just say segregate the data model designing. That's the idea of, around it. Okay, so I hope we all are clear till now, or I can say clear with anything that we have covered so far. Because now what we are going to shift towards is, as you would have observed, that we say that we are going to learn CAPM with a combination of CDS plus Node.js. But we never came across a concept of a Node.js. We never wrote a single line for Node.js. So now we are going towards a controller implementation part of it. So I hope we all are clear till the database and service part of it, because these are the two initial chunk which anyway is going to be there even in case of a controller implementation. Okay, so I'll take it as a yes, that maybe we all are clear. Okay, now let's just say I'm trying to create one more project so that the things are not quite messy. Okay, now I'm trying to create another project and I would like to just perform some operation on my controller. Okay, so I'll simply say CDS init, BTP BE, and maybe for example, it's the controller CNTRL. Okay, let's just name it as anything. I'll just say enter. It created another project. Okay, it created another project which is quite empty right now. If we don't have anything, we'll try to populate it with the live. Okay, now we'll also try to have a look at the things which are going on. I'll just simply say CD BTP BE controller. Clear this and try to view the things which are going on. Okay, now it does not have any data model. It does not have any service. So we know how we can do that. So I'll just try to create a simple file over here called, for example, data model.cds, and I'll create some data model for that. Okay, now here comes the thing. So for example, we are going with a controller. Let's just name it as a namespace btp.c, for example, right? We understood how a table can be created. We know that, right? By just specifying an entity. We understood how a view can also be exposed by using an entity, plus we have to specify CDS persistence exist. Now let's just go back in the world of ABAP, right? In ABAP, what we used to have, in ABAP, we might have worked on different kind of OData service generation. Someone would have worked on SEGW, someone would have worked on CDS, someone would have worked on RAP. N number of capabilities are there, right? So there are different ways we would have generated those things. We know when we have a table, we can simply write a select query on top of it. We can perform insert, update, delete. The same goes with the view. Okay. There might be certain scenario, most of you would have come across it, that when I am saying I have an OData service, I have an OData service which I am trying to create, which is going to have an entity. And now this entity is supposed to return combination of data. Combination of data via some, let's just say custom logic. Or let's just say in terms of a simplest scenario, some sort of a standard get function module. Right. There can be some situation where you are not supposed to write the things which are quite simple select statement. Rather, there can be some input parameter you will pass to function module, which internally will have a complex logic return, which might return you the data and you are passing it as an output to your entity. Possible? Right. So can I easily link it to a just a single database table? No. Can I link it to a complex view which I would have created? No, right? Because other than just a complex view, it could have got different complex logic, which I might be, which I might have to interpret or execute in order for me to come up with data. Okay, so it means this combination of custom logic is nothing but some custom code which is filling the structure with the life. Correct? So what we can do in such a case. So for example, I'm simply saying I have an entity which I'm trying to create, right? And in this particular entity, I'm trying to get some sort of, for example, output data. And this output data should have some sort of a ID. And maybe I can simply say string 36 and maybe some sort of a column 1. And likewise, it can have n number of such a column. Okay, so what we can do in such a case that where we are willing to have some custom data, which we would like to get in the, I mean, as a result of some custom logic which would get executed. In such a case, we cannot directly rely on a table. We cannot create an entity. We cannot even connect to a view because view may not also be right candidate for me to provide those data. What we can do in such a case, right? So The table we understood, view we understood, and the last option over here is if you would like to expose something, then we can also expose something as a structure. Now, structure does not have a data persistency at all, right, on top of it. In ABAP as well, in SE11, if I create a structure or a table type, does it have any sort of data persistency? No, right? It's just a type. Same way, there is also something I can consider just as a type. Still, an entity can be created on top of it. A service endpoint can be created on top of it. And some get call can still get triggered on top of it. I just would like to be responsible for whatever operations which are being performed and how that will perform those operations and where it will impact. Okay. So when a get call is getting triggered, where from where I should be getting the data, I should be responsible for that. Same goes with the create, update, delete, anything, right? Now, in order for us to do that, what we'll simply say is that I am taking the responsibility of whatever happens, whatever response, whatever operation I perform in response with the call. I'll not provide a blind direct structure which would be responsible for that. As simple as that, right? In order for us to do that, what we'll simply say is I'll simply say CDS persistence. This time we won't say exist, instead we'll say simply skip. We are saying do not create or expect a persistence layer for this. Okay, there are no persistence layer who is going to persist this data. Instead, I'll give you the data whenever you request for that. This is the meaning of a CDS persistence skip. It will simply skip that particular set of a data's persistence layer creation. Okay, now when you do that, what would happen is this particular output data that we just write, I'll just simply try to create a service. For example, as we are working on controller, let's just call this service as some sort of a controller service. Okay, now we'll simply create a endpoint for that. We'll simply say, hey, I would like to create a connection for my data. For example, I'll just simply say this one and this data model. Okay, and I'll just simply say service, my controller service. Okay, and I'll just simply say I would like to create an entity over here. For example, I'll just simply say output data. And we'll just simply say as select from my b dot output data. So this b dot output data does not have a persistency, but we are still saying that, okay, in case a call comes on to this, please select the data from this. Now, this selection is something that we are responsible for. We should be writing some logic so that this data can be selected. Plus, it does not have a persistency. So as a best practice, I ideally should be specifying something called read only. Okay, this is also one thing we should be taking care of. Now, let's just say we haven't write any single line of code to for the controller logic so that my data can be persisted, or I can say my data can be reverted back with the right response, right? Let's see how it behaves for now. I'll just simply say I'll create a folder over here called test. Okay, and we know I'll create a folder, a file called test.http. And I'll just simply say get metadata. Okay, I'll just simply say get. Okay, and the endpoint for this is this one. Okay, and here I am interested in dollar $metadata. So I'll just simply say what all things my service contains. It just gave me that, okay, your service over here name is my controller service contain an output data entity with this set of column. I'll say fine. Can I get the data of my output data? Okay, I'll just simply say get output data. Okay, so I'll just simply copy this link and here I'll just simply say get. But this time, rather than this one, I am interested in my entity, which is nothing but this one. I'll copy this and I'll paste it over here and I'll execute. For now, you would see that as if it's returning the data. But the fact is, the moment you switch to HANA, this will start failing. Why is that the case? Because it's SQLite, it's trying to model, it's trying to, let's just say, behave in a way that, okay, it has got some persistency because this was never built. But the moment we switch to HANA, it will start failing, right? So we'll see that in action. But meanwhile, let's just also understand that in case we are supposed to write our logic, how we can do that. Okay. Before that, let's just understand some basic, let's just say concept of a normal Node.js. Before that, let's just understand something of so-called JavaScript, right? So maybe I guess many of you would have worked on this, but I'll simply still give a idea of how the things looks alike. I'll just simply say inspect and I'll just simply say console. Now, ideally, we use console in case we would like to do some sort of operation onto the browser. The base language of it is nothing but your, let's just say JavaScript, right? That's something you understand easily. If I am willing to create some sort of a, let's just say, so what are we currently working? What are we currently doing? We are trying to understand a very basic thing around on and around. Node.js is one more wrapper on top of it. So let's just understand a few minimum things we need in order for us to do anything, right? So for example, when we say I'm writing in a app, if I say I would like to create a hello world program, what will I do? I'll simply say, hey, write hello world. Here, what we'll do is we'll simply say console dot log. And here, whatever we say, for example, hello world, it will be printed. So there is a kind of a hello world for the guys who would have not, let's just say, worked on JavaScript earlier. We can say console.log. There is one. Now, let's just take a first step towards the programming of a JavaScript. If I say I am willing to create a variable into a app, what I ideally do, I'll simply say, let's just say data, and maybe I might define LV underscore I and type I. Right. So for example, I am defining an integer variable over here. But this is not a app. Okay, this is JavaScript. A app ideally is a quite type strict. It says that, okay, if a variable is integer, it is integer. If a variable is a string, it's a string. Okay. So, and you have to define that beforehand saying, okay, what is the kind of data it is supposed to contain. In JavaScript, that's not the case. In JavaScript, we ideally define variable with 3 keywords. Data is not the keyword. We ideally define it with either a let. If I'm just trying to create a variable which is going to exist for a very short time span. If I am trying to define a variable for which exists, or I can say which is going to be there for a bit longer, I'll just simply say var. It's also one of the way of defining a variable. And if I am trying to define a variable which is going to be a constant, I'll simply say const. So the let, var, and const are the way. So for example, I'll just say let a equal to 10. So as I'm assigning the value 10 to it, it will contain value 10. Okay. And if you just check the type of it, so there's a type of keyword which ideally gives you the type of it. So if I say type of A, it will simply say number, right? But I can also simply say, hey, A equal to, let me just assign ABC. Now, if I just say A, this time I just check type of A, it will say string, right? So in Node.js or in JavaScript, to be very specific, the type strictness is not there. Okay, whatever type of data you assign, based on that, system will determine what is a type of variable I can consider it as of. So for me, A for now is, okay, I'll just try to zoom it a bit so it's more readable. Okay, so in Node.js or in JavaScript, based on the type of data you assign, types are ideally defined. Okay, that's one. So we are using let, same way you can use where and const. That's something we'll just use it in the programming. Another one is, so for example, like we have a structure, right, uh, in our web. Same way here we have a structure. We can call it as an object, right? So for example, I'll just simply say let object equal to, and here you will simply say my column one over here contains let's just say value x. My column two contains a value called 10. Okay, and I'll just say enter. And if you now try to view the object, you will say that okay, there is a column 1 and x, column 1 is x, column 2 is 10. So this is our structure is defined for a key value pair. So this is going to be your key, this is going to be your value, and you will see that okay, for this one, column 1, the data is x, for the column 2, the data is going to be 10. Okay. Same goes for multiple set of data, right? It's just one data which I just considered. If I have multiple set of data, I can simply say, for example, let simply I array, which is an integer array I am defining. I can simply say it can contain 10, 20, 30, for example. Right. And if I just view I array, it will give me 10, 20, 30, which is nothing but a array of an integer, which says at position number 0. So in JavaScript, ideally, the first position starts from 0. It says 0. It is having 10. Again, on position number 1, it is 20. And you can read it other way as well. I array of 2, when you say it will return you the. Right. So if you say I array of 2, it will return you 30. Based on the position, it will return you the information. Right. So there is an integer array. Same way I can have a string array. I can just say ABC and it will return me an array of a string. Same way I can have an object array as well. Now why I am coming to object array? Because most of the operations that we are going to perform are going to contain complex set of data, right? Let's just visualize this. If I am saying I am having a data of column 1, it will have some value, right? Column 1 is having C1, column 2 is having C2, and column 3 is having C3. And in my output data, I can have 10 records, correct? It means it's going to be an array of an object, right? So that kind of operation, that kind of data we might see going forward. So I'll just simply say, if I am saying I am defining an array of an object, it can contain, okay, a multiple set of a data, which can say that I can have a column 1 over here, which can contain a, let's just say C1. At the same point in time, I can have a column 2, which can contain 10. I can have, let's just say, column 3, which can contain, for example, true, as in Boolean. It's quite possible, right? Isn't it? And now if I'm defining another set of record, for example, for the same share, because this is array is having an object, so all the type will be same. So it can have, let's just say false, it can have, let's just say 20, and it can have C2. Logically, if I say I am trying to create a table which is containing, let's just say age of a person, definitely it's going to be number. So in this particular column, if I call it as a age, right? So definitely it's going to be number for me, right? And for example, if I say is promoted, whether that person is going to get promoted or not. So maybe I guess 10 and 20 does not make sense in that case. I'll just simply say 40 and maybe 30. Okay, and maybe some sort of a name of that particular person, arbitrary. I am just saying C1 and C2. Could be possible. So in that particular case, I can have a different data for the same attributes for a different kind of instances. So if I just say enter in the A object, you will simply say that, okay, I got two data over here. For the first person, it is this one. For the another person, this is the data, right? So this is called array of an object. These how ideally it looks alike. Now, when you think it from a perspective of an ABAP, it's nothing but an internal table, right? It has got three columns, 1, 2, and 3. For the first record, it is having a data of C1. For the other record, the same property is having a value called C2. So it's nothing but a table. In terms of a JavaScript, we ideally call it as a array of an object. So the curly bracket, wherever it starts, you will always call it as an object. And the one which is with the square, you will always call it as an array. The only thing is, we won't define the type of it beforehand. The moment you assign the type of data, the type will automatically be defined smartly. Okay. Here, the terminating character will always be a semicolon, but it's also not quite strict with that. If you, let's just say, whoever is a good programmer definitely will follow that. Okay, I'm completing all the line with semicolon, and ideally we should do it, right? To make our code clean and maintainable and the stuff like that, to allow avoid any sort of ESLint checks, errors, right? But that's not hard and fast. No one, or I can say your CAP program won't complain if you don't specify the right terminating character, but it's a best practice. And maybe even for your code to be more readable, it's better if you specify semicolon at end of the each line and all those stuff. Okay. So there is a kind of a normal, simple JavaScript. It can have multiple variables define the type of it will define on the runtime. You can have a integer, string, all those stuff. When we are going to come on to if conditions and loop, we'll also say that, but definitely that's also same, right? So if I say I have a object, right? A object, and I can say the a object dot length, which will give me its length. I'll just say 2. So if I say if my a object dot length is equal to, for example, 2, right? I'll just simply say console.log. Oh, for example, 2 records found. Else I can say console.log less than expected record found. Anything, right? So I can have if else like this as well. That's also quite possible. Right. So it says 2 record found because my record has my object has a 2 records. Okay, if I try to let's just say add one more record on top of it, it might just go into else anything it could be, right? Depending on whatever code logic you are writing. You can also loop onto that and XYZ stuff can also be done whenever needed. We'll go in that particular stuff. But this is the basics of a JavaScript. Now, why in the form of a CDS plus Node.js, I just suddenly started teaching you JavaScript? Because when you say Node.js, right, internally, or I can say in a layman term, what if I have to define a Node.js, how will I define? Okay, so if I say Node.js, first thing which I'll say to anyone is most of the thing, or I can say most of the let's just say syntax of JavaScript are supported in Node. This is the one. Okay, that's one. Second, one additional thing which ideally Node.js comes up with it's an execution behavior. Okay, so in JavaScript, when you write like this, you know, okay, first this line will get executed, then this, then this, then this, likewise, sequentially, right? Node.js gives you execution facility, or I can say execution capability in two different ways. Either it can be a synchronous, or if you want, it also can execute the thing in an asynchronous manner. Okay, so it has got a synchronous as well as asynchronous capability. These additional thing which Node.js gives you, plus Node.js also can easily refer to all the open source libraries. Or I can say easy connection to all the open source library. There is something Node.js is quite good at. Okay, so these are the things which are going to follow. It's not quite complex. The only thing that we should be knowing is that, okay, there is a programming language. I have to write some logic in algorithmic way. If I say I have a got a, let's just say person's name, I have to figure out whether that person's name contains just first name, last name, or it contains first name, last name, and middle name by breaking it into a string content. So if you are clear with the algorithm, The syntax is quite simple. Okay, and we'll be able to write that. Okay, so we'll proceed towards our first such implementation. So you should be quite clear, okay, how the things work. Okay. Anyone having any doubt on why we need all these basics and all? Okay, at any point in time you feel you have a doubt, okay, feel free to ask. I know maybe I guess we are maybe I can say most of you would anyway be knowing, but the things might be a bit different compared to what you would have worked on. So it's okay to have questions. Okay, there is nothing wrong in it. Okay, now when I say that I have test.http, it does not have a data. Right now you would see that okay, it's returning some data because it's trying to mock certain things. Okay, now let's just say I would like to watch the thing. Okay, and I would say that if I am saying that the persistence layer for that doesn't exist, I have to write the code logic. Where will I write that? Okay, there are a couple of things. As you can see, it says serving controller service at this. Okay, if you try to create a file which is having the same name as that of this particular service file with the extension of JS, it will automatically get connected. That's one way. Controller service.js. As you can see, it just got reloaded and now it says that, okay, the controller service over here is this. Implementation of this is being served over here. Okay, so it just started suggesting that, right? But I can have n number of, let's just say JavaScript file over here. So will it connect to everyone? Not really, right? If I just go over here and just say rename, I'll just say controller service. For example, I'll simply say 2. As you can see, now it's not connected to that. So if the name of your service CDS file and name of your controller file are same, then only it will connect to that particular file automatically. Otherwise, it won't connect. Okay, in such a case, because many a time we can have a controller file which may not have the same name. Okay, if you would like to go with such a situation, what we can simply do is there is a annotation, for example, at the rate. You can simply put a bracket over here on top of service because we are talking about service implementation. I'll just simply say IMPL and here you will specify the path saying, okay, in the current folder, we have controller service to, okay, .js. Okay, now as you can see, the moment we did that, this service just got connected to IMPL controller service 2.js. Even though we never asked for that, saying the name is similar, but as we have specified this annotation, it will try to connect to that particular file. Okay, that's the way we ideally connect a service and the controller portion of that. Okay, now let's just go over here. Now here we can perform different operations. Now let's just understand few more things as well. Okay, so for example, I can have one file over here. I can have another file, for example, xyz.js, right? And in this xyz.js, I can say I have to define a function, for example, function called dummy function, and it can have one input A and B, for example, and internally it is returning me, for example, A plus B. As simple as that. Okay, so I'm creating a dummy function, for example, for some sort of a add, and this addition, I'll expect that A comma B will be used just for the purpose of addition. It will return me the function. Now I can have it placed under xyz.js. But what I want is that this thing should be exposed so that I can use it over here. Anything that you define in a JS file over here will be quite private by default, or I can say by nature, by default, anything that you define will be private, or I can say not visible to anyone outside. And anyone outside, I mean anyone as in the other file also sitting just beside it will not be able to figure out, okay, there is this component. Okay, even though you say that, okay, I'll add a dependency for xyz.js over here, that won't be accessible until and unless you use a magic keyword. So there is a keyword called module.exports. Okay, so you can simply say module.exports. The moment you say that, okay, I would like to export this, then only this particular function, whichever you are saying, will be made public. So anything which is private, if you would like to make it public, you have to specify module.export with that. It will export this and make it visible to the party who is going to consume that. These are bare minimum thing. These the going to be the sole truth for each and every implementation we do. Okay. Currently, we are not going to consume this, but this time will come when I'll say, okay, when we are going to modularize the thing, we want to export that, but your function will not be visible till the time you don't write the keyword called module.export. Okay. Now that brings me to one more point, that if that's the case, then if I am saying that I am going to define a handler which will handle the get call for this, will that be visible? Okay, it will be visible only if we do certain thing. So there are a couple of, I can say, a skeleton for your controller file. First thing is I have to connect to my, let's just say a package at the rate SAP CDS. How can I connect to that? I'll simply say my CDS package is not going to get changed each time during my execution, right? So I'll just define a constant for that. CDS, I can name it as anything. I'm calling it as a CDS. If you are willing to use any package, you will simply say require. Okay, and within this require, what you'll do is you will find all the packages. As you can see, you found the dev dependency package plus the dependency package. I'm saying I would like to use the @SAP CDS. Okay. Now, once you have got this, you are supposed to do the implementation. Any implementation, any controller implementation that we do, we have to write those publicly so that whenever a service is triggering a call, it's visible. Okay, that's the reason we'll make everything public. I'll just simply say module.export equal to cds.service.impl. So CDS service implementation that we are doing, this should be public. I'll get a service instance. You can name it as anything. I'll name it as a SRV for the service implementation. You can just say curly bracket and that's all. So within this particular code block, whatever you write will be quite visible to your service endpoint. Okay, this is what we ideally do. This is how the service implementation skeleton looks alike. Okay, so now we'll do an implementation for this. We'll understand how the things are going to work. Okay, now in order for us to do that, we should be knowing, we should be understanding a simple skeleton of a service implementation. I'll just simply say, let's just say Capire. Okay, let's just go to this page. That's fine. I'll just go back to the home page again. Okay, and I am trying to search, for example, SRV dot handler registration. Maybe CDS on if that's helps. Okay, so maybe I guess what's this page called? Core service and how we can consume the service. Okay. So in this particular case, you will say whenever you are implementing a service, you ideally should have a sibling of JS and CDS file. If the names are similar, you will start seeing that. Otherwise, you can go with @IMPL, right? And afterwards, when you are willing to do the implementation, you can have different ways you can implement it. Okay. So what you can do is you can simply say, like we have, okay. So I'll just tell you certain thing rather than going over here. You will understand the things quite quickly when I help you relate it with the ABAP. Okay. So for example, I'll simply say that, for example, you are in ABAP, right? And you are supposed to write a code into a class. There is a standard class, for example, which is available because CAP is auto-generated, right? In CAP, most of the things are auto-generated. Certain standard code already exists even without you seeing that. In class, if I have a method, right? And this method which I have, for example, a dummy method, I would like to do some enhancement on top of it. What will I do? I might implement either a pre-exit or a post-exit or something called override exit in a web. What it would do is, before this dummy method gets executed, it will try to execute your code over here. It always gets executed before actual method. If I say post, it will get executed after the actual method's execution occurs. So for example, if you implement a pre-exit, it will execute this, then it will call your method. Okay. If you are saying post exit, after this method's execution, it will call your exit class that you would have written. And if you simply say override exit, it will simply execute your code over here rather than actually implement calling the dummy method over here, or I can say the actual method, right? So this pre-exit, post-exit, and override exit over here in CAP is also there. The concept is quite similar. It says that pre-exit is called before. It's called before handler. After exit is called uh, after handler. Post exit is called after handler, and override exit is called on handler. Okay, so for example, if I am saying that my service, whenever it triggers a call on output data, I would like my handler to be triggered. So for example, if I say srv dot on, okay, and here, if I say whenever someone says, please read this data, I would like to know that, okay, if the call is coming onto this, I would like to intercept that, and I'll just simply say I'll get a handler for that particular request. I'll just simply say REQ, and here I would like to say, hey, I just got the call, and I'll just simply say console.log. I am in on handler. Okay, and maybe if you would like to return some dummy data, I can also say dummy data you can return, or if you want, you can also return empty data. I just return empty data for now. You can do that. Okay, so what you just did is you are saying that whenever a read call is getting triggered on my output data, I'll just write this code saying I am in a in handler. That's what you are saying. Okay, let me just go over here and I'll just simply try to execute this. And as you can see, it says I am in on handler, right? Because the code that you write, you wrote it with the keyword called on. In this service, on a read call that has been triggered for my output data, now you have got a code block. So within this, whatever you write, it's going to get executed. Okay. For example, I can have a before handler as well. So for example, I can say srv.before. Okay. Before even some read call occur, I would like to specify, for example, what should happen is REQ. Okay, and I'll just simply say this one. It just executed before handler first, and then it just went into on handler. Correct. Now I can have n number of before handler, n number of on handler. It could be possible. Okay, and same goes with the after as well. I can have an after handler as well. Okay, I'll just simply call it as after, and just to be in a sync, I'll just call this as an on handler. Simple. Let me just go over here and I'll just simply say execute. As you can see, it executed before handler first, then on, and then after. Doesn't matter in which sequence I have defined it over here. In this file, I define on handler first, but that's not how it gets executed. If I also define one more on handler or before handler over here, before handler 2, it executed my first before handler, then before handler 2, and this one. So you can have n number of custom handlers where you can write your code and decide what should happen. Okay, so when you say the sequence into which it will get triggered, it will always look for any before handler. So it's looking for a before handler. If it finds two, it will say, okay, first one is written on line number 17, another one is on line number 26. So in the sequence into which it has been defined, we'll take the precedence. After before it will look for on, I can have multiple on handler and multiple after handler as well. Now what you can use, which handler ideally you should use for which purpose? When ideally we use before handler. So for example, I am trying to do some sort of an implementation where I am planning to do some sort of a validation, for example, saying whether my data is valid or not. So I am trying to perform some create operation, for example, right? So in case of a create operation, it makes sense that before my data get inserted, I would always do the validation. That's something I'll always do in my before handler. If I am saying that I am trying to perform a read operation, then in my before handler, it makes sense if I do have some authorization check, saying if the person over here who is trying to do this particular activity, whether he's authorized for that or not. So ideally we use before handler to do such an authorization activity in case that's a read call. I mean, I'm just talking about a generic use case. You can use it for any purpose you want based on your requirement, but in general, before handler are kind of a safeguard, a safety net for your application. So you ideally use in case of a create, update, or delete for some validation or authorization. In read, mostly you will use it for authorization check. On ideally you use for actual data fetching. Okay, you will ideally use your on handler for actual data operation. Be it create, update, delete. Okay, this is what you will use your on handler for. And your after handler you will use for any sort of a after activity, after update activity. So for example, I'll say you are creating a purchase, you are creating a sales order, right? After creating a sales order, you are also willing to update a material stock for that. Okay. So in that particular case, once your operation of create has been done, in the after, you can also plan to write the required logic to update the material stock. After update activity, in case of any such operation, let's just say create, update, or delete, you would ideally use your after handler to perform any of the after activity, or I can say post update activity. Mostly in the case of a read, you might use this to update, let's just say any column data based on custom logic. So for example, you have a select query into which there are a couple of columns for which data is not directly available on DB. You would like to update it once the data has been fetched. Then you can use this particular after handler to update the data once it has been selected. Okay. Now, one thing we should be clear about is that the parameters that it takes. So for example, I'm looking for srv.on. Okay. What all things srv.on can have. So if I just go over here in the srv.on, it can have different parameters. Okay, so here I'll just simply say srv.on. Use this method to register handler to run. Okay, what is that? Okay, this before. So it says use this method to register the handler to run before the on handler, frequently used for validating a user input, right? So we are saying a request. So what all thing it can contain srv.before? It can contain your event, which is read, create, update, delete, the name of the entity and the handler. In the request, it will receive the REQ, which is nothing but your request parameter. Okay, so that's what we specified. Now let's just go to the another. It says srv.after. It will always contain the event, the name of entity and handler, and the parameter it will receive is a result, which is nothing but a set of data and REQ. So your after handler will contain a parameter called data and REQ. Data as in the result data. So after your read operation or any operation has been done, if there are any output parameter which has been generated, you will get those over here, and your actual request handler you will get in the second parameter. And the other one, srv.on, you will have two parameters, REQ and next, event, entity, and the two parameters, REQ and next. So which is nothing but your REQ over here and next. Now the purpose is, so for example, when I say it, right, the purpose of on handler is to override some sort of an existing standard implementation. So it may not be required always, right? So for example, if I'm saying I'm writing some custom logic, I might need a custom logic for example, for some specific scenario. For example, for company code 1010, I'll write my own logic. For other, I would like the things to work the way expected. So you can simply say that if let's just say 1 is equal to 1 or any valid condition, then this logic will be executed. In else part, you can simply say, hey, I would like to execute the default logic. You will simply say return next. The moment you do that, you are trying to enforce that the default execution path will continue. Okay, this is what ideally a system does. When you say that you are trying to implement REQ and next are the parameter that you will get in on. In the before, you will just get the request. In the after, you will get the data which would have been generated and the REQ. Theoretically, these are the things that it will contain. We are now going to take a use case based on which you will anyway figure out, okay, this is what we meant and this is what ideally is going to happen. Okay, are we all clear with the kind of possible implementation we can have and the sequence into which it can get triggered, how many handlers I can have, the purpose of individual handlers? Okay, so I'll take it as a yes. Okay, so now let's just say I would like to go ahead and create a simple example. Okay, so all this while we are talking about validations and data insertion, overriding. So let's just take an example. Okay, I'll simply say I would like to create a scenario. For example, I would like to create an application. I would like to create an application which does the assessment, some sort of assessment. For example, I have an industry into which I would like to do some assessment. I have, for example, students whom I have given an assignment saying, okay, it's 12th, okay, it's 17th. Before 24th, you have to submit an assignment, and these the status, what all things should be completed within that. If there are certain things which you are not supposed to do, what are the reasons for that? Likewise, okay. So I can simply call it as a, let's just say entity. For example, let me just call it as a assessment. So I'm creating an entity called assessments, which will just contain my CUID. Maybe I guess it does not have, we have not defined it. So I'll just define it as a using CUID. Okay. And here we are defining, for example, some sort of an agenda saying, okay, what is the assignment which I have given? I'll just simply say string 50 for that. I'll just simply say I have given you assignment on a particular date. I'll just say simply start date, whose type will be nothing but a date. I can have an end date, whose type will again be nothing but a date. Maybe let's just say maximum. If you have also left the end date, when is the due date when you are supposed to submit it latest by? I'll just give a due date as well. For example, I have planned for some dates saying in this assignment should be completed within, let's just say this time span. I'll just give a days planned as well. And maybe in case some assignment I am marking it as a in, let's just say obsolete, saying I don't need it, I'll just simply go ahead with that as well. Obsolete. So I'll just simply say is obsolete, and I'll just give a Boolean variable to it as well. And maybe in case I'm marking something as obsolete, I'll just would like some reason comment as well why it has been marked as obsolete, right? That's something I'll also need. So I'll just give something like that. So I'll just simply format this code, which will create an entity called assessment, which will have all these columns which are going to get stored onto my database. Okay, on top of it, I would also need certain fields which are not supposed to be stored onto database. Rather, those should be calculated real time. Okay, so you remember when we used to work on ABAP, when we used to be CDS views, there can be certain fields which are not stored onto database, rather created, or I can say calculated on the fly. Created it, I can say retrieved during the execution. Okay, we call those field as a virtual. So the same concept is over here. We can have a virtual field. So unlike other fields, right, which are going to get stored onto database, virtual field will never get stored onto database. So if I say, what is the overall status of that? So for example, if my due date has been left on today's date and the document has not been marked as completed or obsolete, I'll just say it has been overdue, or let's just say completed. Based on simple custom logic, we can decide that. So I'll just simply say string 50. Purpose of it is to calculate the status. So for me, it's nothing but a virtual element. Okay, there is nothing but a virtual element which will be calculated by custom logic. Okay, I'll just simply say virtual, and maybe I'll just say overall status. Maybe, okay, this is something you would have heard, right? Those who are also having some idea of theory would be knowing that in case I am having some status, be it, for example, I'm saying, let's just say some sort of a overdue, on track, or completed, anything. I can simply give some color coding to it. So on the UI, it's visible with some sort of a color coding, right? And we can give that with by the means of so-called criticality. So based on the status, I would also like to calculate the criticality for that. I'll just say overall status criticality. Okay, and it's nothing but an integer. Ideally, it just contains a number 0, 1, 2, 3. So I'll just consider it as an integer. Okay, so I just created a certain set of, let's just say, field over here in my entity, and it contains this particular field. We'll be using that, and we'll see, okay, how these things can be used for my normal application designing, and at that point in time, how controller will come into picture. Okay, so I'll just simply say assessment over here. And now when we are saying assessment, I'll simply say, for example, uh, expose this particular entity over here, right? So if I would like to expose this, I'll expose this as a draft enabled entity. So I'll just simply say I would create an entity called assessment, which is nothing but a data selection from my b dot assessment. I just did that. Okay. Now I would also like to give some draft capability on top of it. So I'll just say, oh, data draft enabled over here. And on top of it, I'll try to expose this as a, some sort of a service. So the moment I do that, I'll try to view how the things, or I can say how my data will be looking alike. Okay, so I'll simply say CDS watch for now, and I'll try to annotate the things with some sort of a behavior over here. Okay, I'll just open this in a new tab so my service endpoint is visible. Okay, and I'll just say assessment preview. Okay, and now I'll try to define, or I can say give some sort of a UI behavior to it. I'll just simply say annotate. This is something we have anyway done in the last session, but just for the transaction or the operation to be more evident, to be more visible, I'll just do that for you. I'll just simply say I'm trying to annotate this one, assessments over here. I'll just say assessments. Maybe I guess there was a typo. I'll just copy this, copy this, copy this over here. Okay, what did just happen? Okay, yeah, here. Okay, I'll just simply say assessments over here, and I'll just simply specify width, and I'll just specify the annotation, which I am supposed to over here. Okay, and I'll specify some sort of columns to it. is something we have done already, right? And I hope you guys have already tried out that as well.
Yes.
Okay, I'll just simply say agenda. Maybe I'll also try to add some sort of a data to it, because we are trying to now build a full-fledged application. We have done the service implementation, draft capability, CDS, controller implementation is something that we'll implement side by side. So you know how a full application work along with the custom logic. Okay, that's something our agenda is. So I'll just simply say days planned, for example, and maybe I'll just simply say the status I would like to show. So I'll just simply say criticality, or I can say overall status, for example, and the color coding I would like to give, I'll just give it in the form of a criticality, as you can see. So I'll just simply say criticality and I'll just map it to overall status criticality. Okay. So afterward, for example, I would like to also define if certain things are obsolete. So I'll just simply say whether the things are obsolete over here. And maybe I might also be interested in specifying some sort of a reason comment. I can do that as well over here. Okay. And for all this field, I'll simply give individual fields a label. So I'll just simply say agenda over here. Okay, I'll just simply say agenda, and maybe for the other fields as well. For example, start date. Okay, and maybe some sort of a due date. And maybe let's just say days planned. And for example, status we are calling. And for example, for is obsolete, let me just call it as a obsolete with a question mark. I'll just add a semicolon in the end. And maybe reason comment why it was marked as obsolete. Okay, now once I have that, maybe I'll view the application for sure, but at the same point in time, okay, so we have got this particular set of information visible. Now, the only thing that we are left out with is the object page designing. So we'll just keep it simple. We'll just create just a single facet. Okay, so our data entry can also be done, and we can focus on the thing that we are mainly focusing on, the controller logic, right? So I'll just define a set of a field group for us. So I'll just simply say field group over here, and I'll just give it some qualifier. For example, let me just call it as a some sort of a basic data. Okay, and here I'll just specify a data to it, and maybe in this data we'll specify the thing which are relevant. So for example, I'll just simply say agenda and all those stuff which we have. So I'll just simply say agenda, maybe let's say start date, end date, and let's just say due date as well. Okay, and now we'll just simply say go with a days plan. Okay, and on top of it, for example, I would also be interested in giving some sort of a overall status. And yeah, we can also give some sort of a criticality to it. That's also fine. Okay, so we created this, and now we are supposed to specify some facet where my field group ends. So my field group ends over here. I'll just simply specify some sort of a facet to it. And in this facet, we are just saying, okay, I should create a reference facet. Target to this should be nothing but this one. And I'll just give it a label. For example, I'll just simply say my basic data. Okay, and I'll just give it some ID. Okay, and I'll just simply say ID for my basic data. As simple as that. Okay, let's just refresh this, and my application at least should be up and running. Okay, now I'll simply click on create. Okay, so I have this entry page where I would like to have my data and everything inserted, but as you can see, my overall status. Okay, let's just start observing the things. Here, as we can see, overall status over here is empty. That's the one. Second point is that's read only. Did I mention anywhere that that should be read only? No, right? But as I have mentioned that as a virtual, it means system knows that it does not contain any persistency. It means it does not really make sense for anyone to enter a data, rather they should be calculated. That's the reason the moment you specify a field as a virtual, by default, it will become read only. Okay, that's one important thing. Another one is, so for example, I would like to specify saying whenever someone is creating some sort of let's just say assessment, my start date over here should be let's just say before my end date. If my start date is after my end date, I ideally should give an error. Okay, same way my due date should occur, let's just say after my start date, right? If it occurs before, I should also throw an error for that as well. And the error should also be visible quite clearly. So what we are talking about is a validation. And as we mentioned, right, whenever you are trying to perform some create operation, if you want to write some validation, this is a place where you will write it. Right. On top of it, for example, what you are also willing to do is that if I am saying that my assessment which I am creating over here, I would need certain field to be, let's just say mandatory. So for example, I am saying my agenda over here should be mandatory. No one should be able to create an assessment without an agenda, right? So what you can do is on this property level, you can simply go ahead and add an at the rate, and you will see multiple things which are possible. So I'll simply add a something called mandatory. Okay, now if I just say I just add a mandatory over here. Back, I'll just click on create. As you can see, it just started showing an asterisk sign over here, right? If I try to click on create, it just say value is required, and it is navigating me to the place where it says, okay, this particular thing is required and you are missing that thing. Okay. So if you do not specify that, it won't allow you creating a document. So that's something which is an annotation level thing, which allows you specifying what all things are required and where you have to specify that. That's something which is quite important. On top of it, for example, I'll just say it signify that the document is mandatory and the particular field will not be should not be empty. Okay, otherwise CAP runtime will reject that. So likewise, specify the fields which you need. So for example, I'll just send if specify mandatory. These are called annotation level validation. Okay, this does not have this does not have anything onto the custom logic level. Instead, it's an annotation level validation. Okay. So now I'll specify it for all the fields which I need. Okay. So likewise, we can have some more validation as well. So for example, I have specified this annotation level validation. I'll just go back. I'll just try to see whether for all the four fields which I mentioned, do I have the mandatory markup appearing? Okay, I have agenda, start date, end date, and all the four of them are mandatory. So without passing without passing all of them, I won't be able to proceed. So I can see that, okay, the linkage is also done. The moment I click on which field is mandatory, it points me, or I can say shift my cursor to that field as well. Okay. On top of it, for example, I would also like to add some annotation level validation. For example, I'll say I am trying to give students the assignments, but that particular assignment should be, let's just say, minimum of 7 days and maximum of 21 days. It should not be less than 7 days, or it should not go beyond 21 days as well. So what I can do is I can simply use one more thing called assert. Okay, so you can simply say assert, and there is one more thing. Either it should be not null, or if I would like to also validate the range, I can simply say assert the range. And here I can specify, for example, it should be between 7 and 21. Okay, I can do that as well. So if you try to specify which is not within that range, you will also get some error. So for example, I'll just format this data. You see, it says there is an integer, and but the range of it should be between 7 to 21. I'll just open this. Okay, I'll click on create, and I'll try to add some data. For example, I'll just say new assignment. I am specifying start date is today, this is tomorrow, and date is tomorrow. And I'm saying, okay, the assignment is for 5 days. Okay, if I click on create, as you can see, value 5 is not in the specified range. Okay, it's giving us some funky message. Maybe we can also think how we can change this message. But the idea is, thanks to the annotation level capability, we are also able to get some validation being thrown automatically without us writing any single line of custom code logic over here. Okay, so if I am saying 5, it's giving me some error. If I just say 7 and I click on create, as you can see, now my record is getting created, right? So this is something which will get created only if the required validations are passing. Till the time user won't be able to proceed. A kind of a safety net around the application, which ensures that the data which is valid are all only going to get inserted into my DB. Right. Now, as I said, I am saying my start date is mandatory, end date is mandatory. But what if I would like to, let's just say, ensure at the same point in time, saying my start date should not be before my end date. Okay. Or there can be a question saying, okay, in this particular one, mandatory is saying value is required. Rather than that, I would like to give some custom message on my own. Can I do that? You can write your own set of custom validation as well. Okay, so for example, let me just do that. I'll just say I would like to add some custom validation. Okay, so for example, I'll just say validation. Which node will I use for custom validation? SRV dot before, correct? And in this before, what is the operation that we are performing? I'll just say I am trying to perform a create operation. Right? You see the documentation, right? Which says which event and on which entity. So I'll just say the entity on which I am trying to perform is this assessment. Okay, so on this assessment, you are trying to perform some operation. What is that? So you are simply saying REQ over here. Okay, so here you are saying before even my record gets created, I would like to perform some operation. Okay, so before your record gets created, this is the method that ideally gets executed. Okay, so what we'll say is we'll try to view the things that you ideally get before even your create operation gets performed. Okay, so I'll just simply put a breakpoint over here and maybe, okay, let's just say, okay, let's just make our application ready so that maybe we can see the data getting persisted as well as we can also execute the things in a right shape. Okay, so for example, I'll just simply try to create a run configuration for my another application. Okay, controller over here. Okay, I'll just go over here in debug. Let's see, I have got the controller and I can simply click on this run. Okay, now if you see my application is loaded, I'll just simply run this application. Open this. So I'm in a debugger mode. in a in-memory database. So what I just did is I just created a run configuration. The moment you do that, you will start seeing your thing over here in the drop down. I just selected my run controller saying this is the one that I am willing to execute. It just executed it in the debug mode. I'll just click on create. I have a breakpoint available right over here. Till now, it has not got triggered. I'll just say new assignment. And I am saying tomorrow is a start date and today is the end date, which is ideally incorrect, right? And I'll just simply say 8. Now, if you just simply say create, for example, you would see a debugger just got triggered, correct? What all thing debugger contains, right? Because we should be knowing in order for us to write the logic, right? So what you are getting over here in the input REQ, which is the request parameter. Request parameter contains multiple things. It contains REQ. The important thing that you will use, ideally you should use the thing which is called data. So REQ data over here, as you can see, is having agenda, days, plant, start date, end date, everything that you entered. So you can simply make out from here, right, that your start date is this, end date is this, due date is this. So if we want to write the logic that my start date should not be after my end date, I can simply write the logic over here by putting the logic on my what? REQ.data. You can simply write something on req.data and maybe you will get all of them. You can say req.data.start date and you will get the start date as well, right? That's something which is possible. If you, for example, if you would like to copy this particular one, you can just say copy as expression and you will get this. So many a time, if the path is too deep and you are, if you don't want to, let's just say go into detail, you will just simply say right click, copy as expression, and you will be able to do this. Okay, so it will give you the path using which you can get this information. Okay, as simple as that. So this CAP debugger is quite versatile in that sense. Now, what you are supposed to do, or I can say what you are willing to do is you are willing to put a validation. Whenever we are saying we are putting a validation, you would see that particular data is the one which is giving you a data. Plus this particular request also will have got some important thing called error that you can also raise so that your response is let's just say generated correctly. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just simply go over here and I'll simply write my logic in my before handler saying if my req.data.start date, okay, maybe we can copy it from here. Okay, if my start date over here is after my end date, right? So where is my end date over here? This one. If start date is after my end date, then in that particular case, I would like to do something. Same goes for the other one, saying if my start date, or let's just say if due date, for example, right? If due date is occurring before my start date, then that's also invalid. We would like to raise an error. Okay, so what we are supposed to do in this particular case is this REQ is a variable. This is the communicating party. Whatever you tell to your REQ will ultimately be communicated to the world outside. That's why it is called your request handler. All your request response will be handled from here. So in this request, you would like to turn it down and you would like to say that this request is invalidated. It has got some invalid data. What you will do is you will simply say req.error. And in this one, you would simply specify the things those matter. So for example, you can specify, okay, if you would like, you can also search for the syntax of that, okay, req.error. Okay, so you will also find the way errors can be handled. Maybe here. Is that? Yeah. So it says req.error and maybe it might also point you to some sort of a error handler. Mhm. In this particular Kepler only, you will find how the syntax work, because I am also using the syntaxes from there only. Maybe I can just point you to the point where you can search for, but there is a cookbook. You can search for Kepler and you will find the syntax. You will say request.error, and whenever an error occurs, right, you ideally give a error code. So for example, I'll just simply say 501 is the error code I am giving, and I am just simply saying message which I would like to give to it is message over here, and I'll just simply say my end date cannot be let's just say earlier than start date. Okay, and maybe for example, you are also willing to point to a particular field. So when you are willing to point to a particular field, what you will simply specify is a target. In the target, you have to specify IN for that particular input field, and you have to specify full path. Okay, so what is a path for me? If you are currently on an assessment entity, the path will be end date. If you are, let's just say, on a willing to do that on a table layer, you have to specify the name of association and the field. Okay, as simple as that. I'll just specify this one saying, okay, my due date can also not be that one. So I'll just simply say due date. Okay, and here you can also specify a due date, saying due date can't be earlier than start date. You can simply do that. The moment you do that, your system will try executing this thing before your actual save, and this will be termed as your validations. Okay, so for example, if I just simply say CDS watch now, okay, and I'll just simply go over here and I'll just refresh this. Okay, I'll just simply say create, for example. And as we can see, we are going to pass all the data which are needed. But I'll just simply say tomorrow over here, today over here, and maybe my due date also. I'll specify something which is even before my start date. So I'll just simply say 12. Okay, and I'll just simply say 8. So rest all are mandatory parameter. I have added that this is also well within the range, but my custom validation should fail over here. So if I just click on create, as you can see, it says that my end date can't be before my start date. If I click on this, it says my due date also over here can't be earlier than my start date, because both are invalid, right? Now, for example, if I simply say that this is my end date, okay, let me just convert it into 17, and let me just convert this into 18. And now if I try creating this, it says still your due date is earlier than start date. Can you please correct that before saving the data? So I'll say, okay, my due date should be, for example, 20. So if I now save the data, then only it will allow me saving the information. Okay, because my safeguard part, my before handler is there, it is validating the data before even I add anything. Okay, so this is the importance of any custom validation, custom handler, be it with the entity which has its persistency or even with the one which does not have its persistency. Custom handlers are going to be quite handy, and JavaScript and Node.js are going to be the language that we are going to use for that. Okay. Anyone having any doubt, any confusion, any questions till now?
Yes, Sumit, I have one question, small
Yeah, yes.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
please,
is
please.
in real time we want to use the CUID, right? Instead of that, we will create a data with the record number or something, invoice number like that. But we want to use CUID, right?
You look, there are two kind of application. One with GUID. Okay, so you ideally go with GUID, which is called a non-semantic key-based implementation, into
Mm-hmm.
which you will have one more parameter called assessment ID. You can go with that, and in that assessment ID, you will create a particular. I can say you would add the number by
Mm-hmm.
adding it in the before handler. So why do we have a before handler? So you can have enrichment as well. So you can do the validation plus if the validation pass over here, you can just simply say that, okay, now add the, let's just say correct ID to my agenda. So you can, what you can do is the number range or the new number that you are saying, you can store it to that. So what you can do
Okay.
is, for example, if my validation pass, my data is about to get saved, right? So you will just simply say, for example, I'm using one existing field for now, or let me just say, I'll use one more agenda ID field over here. Okay, agenda ID. And here you will simply say it's going to be my string 30. Okay, and I'll just simply add this particular field. And I would simply say that this particular agenda ID field, I would like to be visible on my column over here. It's the data field. Okay, and I'll add this over here. So I have not asked my user to add it, rather I am doing that. Okay, so here
Mm-hmm.
I have added agenda ID. Now after adding that, I'll just simply go over here and I'll just say I would if my all the validation pass, just at end of my before handler, I'll just simply say request dot data dot agenda ID equal to, for example, I'll just simply say agenda 01. For example, now we can have a custom logic using which I can determine what is the maximum number, or even I can have some sequence and everything that we can generate. That's a HANA database component. We can plan for that as well. But
Okay.
point is, if you do that, the moment I say I have a number, or I can say my data, which is about to get generated after all the validation pass, I'll just say new assignment um, today, tomorrow, today, let's just say tomorrow, let's just say 9. In that particular case, the moment I say create, I'll just go back and you see agent ID getting assigned over here. So
Yeah.
on final save, you can get those also number generated, because those are also going to get persisted. The idea is why CUID concept become very famous. So maybe if you start learning RAP as well, you will see the GUID based keys are quite being used. Reason being, this agent ID and everything also makes sense for my end user, isn't it? So till the
Mm.
time my user does not have saved the data, he has not considered that, okay, my record is saved. If I assign the number beforehand, I might get some gap in between, right? Agenda 01 was there, someone created 02, they discarded the draft, so the 02 was gone. Rather than that, at the final time when a save is done, if I can assign something which will play the role for key for my end user, but for me to uniquely identify record, I can have something which is quite unique for the database. So both the keys are not getting mixed. That's the reason this is going to play a key role, which my user anyway doesn't care about. But for my user, I can specify any sort of number range. I can assign any number which makes sense for them. Okay, make sense?
Yes, Sumit.
Okay. Yeah. Any other doubt?
Yeah, Sumit.
Mm.
Mhm.
Uh, Sumit.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Yeah. So I have a question like we are giving start date, end date. Okay. So
Mhm.
suppose that like in start date we are giving today date. Okay.
Mhm.
So end date we can restrict like 2 month, like from today to like t- uh, today is like suppose a 16. Okay.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
16 Jan 16 Feb. Up to
Mhm.
only 16 Feb, like user can select the date range.
Look, there are two things. You can put a validation on a cap side saying your end date, if it is greater than 2 months, you would like to give an error. That's the backend thing we can do. On the UI side, you can still specify. On the Fiori side, you can add a custom, let's just say a formatter, and maybe on the controller level, you can also decide by adding a particular custom field saying the date that you are opening right over here. That's what you are saying, if I got you correctly. Saying if I just try to open this, then here you are saying that after 17th, only 2 months of period will be open for
Yes,
selection.
yes, yes,
But that's something for which
yes,
you
yes.
will need a UI change. So that's achievable via Fiori element, that can definitely be done. But that's something which cannot be achieved via CAP, or I can say via backend logic, because there is a UI. It's a client
Yes, yes.
side control, right? So on the client side control, what you can
Okay.
do is the moment you get the start date, on the next date, you can just simply go ahead and open those particular range for input. Other than that, everything else will be disabled. That's doable.
Yes.
That's a UI development. Maybe you can look for some UI extension or UI field. So if you just put a date control over here in the freestyle, that's anyway being done. In the Fiori element, that can be done by adding a particular custom field for that.
Okay.
So that's definitely maybe I guess the common requirement, and everyone does that, and that's also quite much, I mean, quite possible. But the thing is that needs to be implemented from UI side.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay, are we all clear, or any other doubt we have? Okay. So maybe I guess we have done the before handler implementation. Now what we are also going to do is this virtual field, how this can be calculated, and maybe the is obsolete and recent comment that we have marked over here. We are also going to understand how we can add some action. So for example, assessment has been created and I would like to, for example, go back and I'll just say I don't want this assessment. I would like to mark this as a obsolete and I would like my user to add a comment and I can mark them also as an obsolete if that kind of activity I also am willing to perform. Then rather than the standard action, custom action might also come into picture. So how that can also be done, what kind of logic we'll write, what are the things that will be there on Node.js and what are the things that we can have on the HANA procedure side. Those flavors are also something that we have planned. That's something we'll be continuing in the session that follows. Okay, post that we'll continue towards the media entity, how the attachment or I can say media can be handled and how the media can also be redirected rather than being onto the database to the Azure Storage Cloud. That's something we are also planning maybe. That would be our main agenda in the week that follows. Okay, so I'll just say maybe just try giving the hands-on on the things that we have tried so far. We'll be maybe meet in the next week. We'll call it a day for today then. Okay, okay then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot everyone
Thank
for
you.
joining. Bye-bye.